Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Anti-Aging Hacks podcast. Today I have a very special guest, and we're going to talk about oxytocin, which is the love and connection molecule. So, in terms of introduction, Dr. Paul Zak is the founding director of the Center for Neuroeconomic Studies and the professor of economics, psychology, and management at Claremont Graduate University. He has degrees in mathematics and economics from San Diego State University, a PhD in economics from the University of Pennsylvania, and postdoctoral training in neuroimaging from Harvard. So he's a smart cookie, guys. He has an academic lab, the first neuroscience as a service platform and neuromanagement company. His latest book, Trust Factor, The Science of Creating High Performance Companies, uses neuroscience to measure and manage organizational cultures to inspire teamwork and accelerate business outcomes. His 2012 book, The Moral Molecule, The Source of Love and Prosperity, recounted his unlikely discovery of the neurochemical oxytocin as the key driver of trust, love, and morality that distinguishes our humanity. Paul's research in oxytocin and relationships has earned him the nickname Dr. Love. So with that said, Paul, welcome to the Anti-Aging Hacks podcast.
Thanks so much, Faraz.
So you wrote a book many years ago called The Moral Molecule, The Source of Love and Prosperity. Tell our listeners how you got into oxytocin in the first place and writing that book. Was it an act of serendipity, or did you plan this the whole time?
Yeah, a little of both. I mean, I'm really interested in human social behaviors, and one of the outstanding things about humans is that you see a lot of quote good behavior, even when no one's looking, even when it's costly. People helping others out, doing the right thing. Like laws. Maybe 2% of the population actually need laws. The rest of us, no. We have a sense of what's right and wrong. So how do we know that? So I had done work on trust across countries and shown that trust was among the strongest predictors economists have ever found to determine why some countries grow in their living standards and why others stagnate. And so people would ask me this question, well, gosh, we're a given country. Why do two strangers ever trust each other? I said, man, that's a hard problem. I don't know. And so then you get this feeling like, man, I'm so full of crap. I can't actually answer the most basic questions. So I really started looking at trust as so profound in terms of its ability to reduce poverty. But then the more you think about it, almost everything we do involves trust. And so I was really looking for this mechanism that said, Faraz, great guy, happy to trust him. And your producer, George, awful, terrible human being. I don't even know who he is. I'm making this up, right? So we can't live in big cities. We can't, be a quote social creature unless we have something in our head that helps us distinguish, maybe not perfectly, but helps us to distinguish people who are safe or trustworthy from those who are not. And then once we I found oxytocin in the animal literature, I said, oh, this looks like a potential factor because it's associated with bonding and what we might call friendship among non-human animals. So maybe this works. And there was no protocol to measure. So ultimately, if there's been a secret to my success, it's I'm a tool guy. And so I developed a protocol to measure the human brain's production of oxytocin involving repeated blood draws. And in animals, you just drill a hole in the skull and suck it out. And I don't know a ton about humans, so I'm just guessing that humans are not going to be so keen on that.
Right. And so, with oxytocin, so first of all, congratulations for being somebody that's led research in this new area. It's an exciting field. Oxytocin is, as we know, is the bonding molecule. And from the research that I had known about, it was at least it's elevated in moms that are about to go into labor. And as they're giving birth to a child, it elevates even more. So what exactly, how does it work? Like, how's it in the back end? Obviously it's in the brain, it's in the blood, but what have you uncovered in terms of the hormone oxytocin by itself?
So let's be clear, not talking about oxytocin as a hormone. So there's about 200 different chemicals that are active in the body. Some of those are active in the brain. Some are which we call neurotransmitters or neuromodulators. Some of those in the peripheral nervous system, which are called hormones. So oxytocin, like many neurochemical, plays a dual role. It's both a neuromodulator or a neurochemical in the brain, but also a hormone in the body. So the hormone effects in humans are old. A Nobel Prize was given in the 1940s for oxytocin, which means quick birth, that contracts the uterus during birth. Not interesting. What I was interested in is the behavioral effects, and those come from oxytocin released in the brain. And here's a really weird thing, because oxytocin only exists in mammals, but it has a very long lineage, maybe 400 million years as it evolved into the mammal line. On a social stimulus, oxytocin is released in mammals, both in the brain and in the blood. So, because I discovered that or figured that out, if we do rapid blood draws, we can look at the change in blood, which reflects the change in brain, hence the lack of drilling into the skull.
I
So that's
got you.
very unusual. There are almost no neurochemicals that have that same approach.
Mhm.
So what we're doing is we're measuring peripherally, but getting a reflection of what's happening centrally in the brain. So what we found over these 20 years of research is almost any positive social stimulus, including, by the way, video conferencing online, causes the brain to make oxytocin, and then a cascade of effects happen. So that's really relative to our conversation today. One is that we are constantly maintaining homeostasis. And part of that homeostatic balance is social. I want to maintain appropriate fear, vigilance when I'm around strangers, with the value of interacting with that stranger, which could be friendships, doing a project together, a cute guy or girl, who knows? So we're maintaining this balance, and oxytocin is part of that balance. When the brain releases it, it reduces the physiologic stress around being around other people and motivates us to interact with others. So that's really interesting. So when we start thinking about our human social nature, that's almost the definition of what it means to be a social creature. And humans are gregariously social. We socialize with, almost any member of our species, unless they're super scary, carrying a knife, crazy homeless guy, right? That we know not to do. But everybody else are like, most people are actually pretty cool to interact with. So reduces that physiologic stress, motivates social interactions. It does that by reducing this stress response. So what we see is that people who have strong, high quality relationships have lower physiologic stress, longevity, right? So now I'm not having that elevated heart rate. I'm not having that glucose dump into my bloodstream. And so I'm actually going to be healthier and potentially live longer. Third, because I have that reduction in physiologic stress, I have an improved immune system. So in fact, there are receptors for oxytocin in the skin. So it's associated with wound healing. So again, nature's very conservative, reuses neurochemicals for lots of purposes. So we're not talking at all about oxytocin facilitating birth or breastfeeding. We're really talking about its behavioral effects, which come from the brain. So even that package tells you how important it is to have those social relationships. By some measures, having a rich social life is actually more important to your health than quitting smoking. So it
Wow.
just tells you how profound these effects are. And then lastly, I should say, if you haven't figured this out already, I'm a total nerd and introvert. Love to be in the lab, love to not talk to someone for 10 hours. But doing this research, I really realized the importance of these social relationships and really changed my life around to invest in those social relationships. And I think I'm certainly a happier person. I've always been very healthy. We'll see how long I live. So check in with me in 50 years. Let's see how I'm doing.
I think you live in Loma Linda, Dr. Zach, so I think you've got a very good chance just by association with the Blue Zones folks over there. But I want to get to that in a second. You've also done a lot of experiments. I think you touched on lots and lots of blood draws just to measure before and after in some of your experiments. You've traveled overseas to remote places to kind of draw your conclusions and get the data that you need. So, what are some interesting experiments that you've done, and as a result, what did you learn from them?
Yeah, lots of crazy experiments because both by personality and by training, I'm a skeptic. So, I don't want to do things like write books or talk to nice people like you without really having enough confidence in the data. So,
Mhm.
uh, for example, I went into the rainforest of Papua New Guinea and was embedded with a tribe there, which is, you know, the chief had a cell phone, but basically there's no running water, no electricity, no bathrooms. And so you are out there and, no doctors, no hospitals. I mean, you're on your own and um, engage these indigenous people in the rainforest with an anthropologist who had worked with them to measure whether social activities that they typically do, not something I designed in my laboratory, induced the release of oxytocin, and in fact found that they did. And measured oxytocin in weddings. I've done it in done a lot of work funded by the U.S. military and U.S. intelligence community to really understand how we can effectively connect as human beings. By the way, the work of the military was all about reducing conflict. How can we actually use words, use communication so that I don't need to persuade you or encourage you to say collaborate with the U.S. government to say find the bad guys in Afghanistan, but could use words to do that. And so, a sort of a secret sauce is that oxytocin is a powerful persuader to have people help you. And that's something that all social creatures want to do. I don't think persuasion's a bad word. I want to persuade my kids to do this and that. I want to persuade my wife to continue to be nice to me. And in work, I want to persuade people to work with me. So I think knowing that connection is the foundation for persuasion is kind of interesting. So again, it's not a bad word for me. Again, you have freedom of choice. I can be the most persuasive. I mean, again, you have to be authentic, right? So that's what we also know is humans are really good at looking at finding liars. In fact, we've done a lot of work with criminal psychopaths. We're just starting to publish a lot of research on criminals who what we roughly find is that psychopaths in particular don't have the oxytocin response that normal people do when you have someone who asks for your help or needs your help or watch a sad movie. All these are stimuli for oxytocin release in most people, but psychopaths don't have it. And that's why they have this kind of coldness. They just see others as a means to an end, not as sentient human beings with feelings and emotions.
I might actually know a couple of those. And so if somebody's watching a sappy movie, let's say the Titanic or something, right, from 20 years ago, and they don't cry, is that a good sign that they might have some tendencies?
No, I don't think so. We have developed stimuli that are very reliable oxytocin stimuli. So let's talk about measurement for a second. So oxytocin levels are not very important. So the brain works on changes, on contrasts. And so the kind of protocol I developed to measure oxytocin in humans uses a stimulus, some kind of social stimulus to induce the brain to make oxytocin. And we look at that change, hence the repeated blood draws. And oxytocin has a very short half-life, and it's kind of a tiny little molecule that's not very held together very well. So it requires some special activity. So levels are not very important, at least from the behavioral effects, but these changes are. So we do find that individuals for a given social stimulus have a much bigger change in oxytocin, are on self-report more satisfied with their lives, and that derives from three sources. They have higher quality romantic relationships, they have more friends, and they have better quality family relationships. So now we're back to kind of an interesting tuning effect. So for listeners, even if you don't cry at Titanic, your brain is adapting to the environment you're in. And to the extent that, like me, you work on forging those strong social connections, social emotional connections with those around you, your brain adapts and you begin to be biased towards releasing more oxytocin. And so you become a better connector. In other words, you can practice and train yourself to be a better connector. And again, if a weirdo like me can do it, anyone can do it. Now, there's a downside to that. So one reason oxytocin makes us much better social creatures is it increases our sense of empathy. So once you become, a better connector, a more empathic person, you do become a movie crier. So you guys can't see, but I'm 6'4", 200 something pounds. I'm an athlete. I'm a high energy, crazy dude jumping out of airplanes and doing whatever. And you put me in a movie and I'm just crying like a baby. So, but also I think I'm much more sensitive to the social cues around me because of the work I've done. And so I think there's a balance there, right? There's a balance between, I don't want to cry every time I, drop a pen or something. But I do want to be open to the emotional state of those around me. So here's a practical thing that listeners can do. If you want to learn to be a better connector, instead of just saying this sort of trivial greetings that we give to each other, hey, Faraz, how are you? And good, how are you? Just say, hey, Faraz, you look, and then fill in the blank with an emotional word. Hey, you look happy, sad, tired, anxious, worried, joyful. And then we open up a whole new channel of communication that facilitates better connection, right? So by opening that up and being yourself vulnerable enough to share that with others, particularly now with lockdowns and COVID and a lot of stress in the world, and what could be better from your family and friends than to ask how they are doing emotionally, and then absorb. Don't just do that as an exercise. Do it as an absorbing information. So anyway, long story short, I do a lot of experiments on not only others but on myself. So one of the ones I did recently and continue to do is the elevator talking.
Hmm.
I think it's really weird for social creatures to sit in a box for 30 seconds and pretend like the other people are not there with us.
Right.
So I decided to do an experiment, which is I'll just say hi to people in the box and see what happens. And
Hmm.
so about half the people are just freaked out. And that somehow makes me happy. And the other half, you have this amazing little 20, 30, 40-second conversation,
Hmm.
and they feel happier, you feel happier, and you behave like a good social creature, like a good connector. So
Hmm.
why not give that gift to somebody else? I don't want anything from it, although it will make me happy. Give
Yeah.
that gift of being present, of being available to someone around you. And then you can train yourself to be a better connector.
Hmm. So, wow, this is great. So, obviously, as you mentioned, oxytocin, empathy, likability, trust with others. And so, there's ways that we can increase the oxytocin naturally in our bodies. You were talking about a couple examples, the elevator talk, asking people how they're doing or how they're feeling, or calling it out in a way to encourage the deeper conversations. So it goes to say then, Paul, that just having conversations face to face and even on Zoom, like we're doing right now, would increase oxytocin. What are some other ways that you found that anybody can do quite commonly to just hack their oxytocin levels in their body?
Yeah, I love that. So again, we've spent a huge amount of time doing this. So basically, any activity you do together, particularly if it's in sync, singing, dancing, uh, marching, soldiers marching release oxytocin,
Hmm.
athletes practicing. My favorite is the hug. So even just a couple of second hug is a great way to induce the person you're giving the hug to release oxytocin. They're generally going to hug you back, so you'll get that as well. So oxytocin is really a gift you have to give to somebody else. It's very difficult to make your own brain release oxytocin. An exception might be an emotional movie. But if you give that gift to someone else, then they're going to be motivated to give that gift back to you. So that's the essence of sociality, which is someone's got to initiate this. So that's hence the elevator talking. You can be the initiator. And for some reason, I don't know, we're told we shouldn't do that. So with work I've done with organizations, with companies, as discussed in my last book, we are built to form connections. So to think that you're not going to form relationships, friendships or whatever with people that you work with is just nuts. That's not the way our brains are set up. But it
Hmm.
also means that human beings like to work in groups on projects. So if you have a group of people that you trust and you're doing something you think is important, which I call purpose, I know the purpose of why we're doing what we're doing, and I really can count on these people and they can count on me, then you see teams performing at very high levels. So working as in groups is not unnatural for humans. It's actually what we do very naturally. Our brains are anatomically designed to be very sensitive to social cues. That is, we have many more oxytocin receptors in areas of the brain that make it rewarding for
Hmm.
us to be around the other humans.
Wow. Okay. So I'm going to go out on a limb here. I've got this
Yeah.
suspicion from years ago, in when I was doing, just the very minimal amount of research on oxytocin many years ago. In that, if you are, as you mentioned, doing an activity with a stranger or somebody you just met, and there's high levels of oxytocin released during that initial set of interactions, is the presence of oxytocin binding you to that person, or in other words, could you have low levels of oxytocin over a longer period or a high levels of oxytocin over shorter interactions and have a better relationship? One case in point would be when the mother gives birth to a baby, she gets flooded with oxytocin. And, I surmise that maybe that's what's bonding a mother to a child. I don't know. But have you at all researched this particular aspect in your research?
Yeah, this is the value of being old like me and having done this for a long time. So it's a good neuroscience question, and the answer may surprise you. So what we see is that when someone interacts with a safe, trustworthy appearing stranger, we actually tend to see larger increases in oxytocin than when we interact with people we know really well. And that happens for a good neuroscience reason, which is the brain is a very lazy organ in the sense that it takes about 20% of your calories to run your brain. So it's a lot of overhead. So once I've been married 25 years, once I've established that my wife is safe to be around, my brain does not need to synthesize oxytocin, which is metabolically costly, for me to know that she's safe, right? I have memories of her that are much less costly to access than to release oxytocin. Having said that, for a given kind of relationship, the amount of oxytocin release is a fairly good index. of the degree of connection with that person. So in this wedding I mentioned, I took blood from the bride and groom in the wedding party. Who's the center of the wedding solar system? It's the bride. She had the biggest oxytocin release. But who's next? Who loves the wedding almost as much as the bride? Not the
The groom.
groom, the bride's
The groom.
mother. No, the bride's mother. She loves this stuff, right? She's going to get grandkids, right? So the
Uh-huh.
groom was, in the top 4 or 5, and then, as you got further, that's the solar system. As you get further from the bride, who is the sun, the oxytocin release was less,
Mhm.
generally speaking. So again, it's this adaptation. It's not the brain is never fixed. There's nothing one-to-one in the brain. And as you said, even things like mother-child bonding, although driven in large part by oxytocin, there's a whole bunch of other neurochemicals involved. So I want to make sure listeners don't think that all of friendships or romantic relationships or whatever are only driven by oxytocin. It's just part of a much larger brain circuit, which we spend a lot of time characterizing. But oxytocin was kind of the missing piece. It's kind of a key early signaling molecule that says
Yeah.
this person's safe, this person's trustworthy, this person is okay to be around,
Mhm.
again motivates you to sort of invest in that relationship, which is again that essence of sociality.
And building rapport is so important. And to your point, if you don't have trust, if the first signals are bad, you're not going to build rapport with somebody and not have those long-term relationships. So I guess I'll ask the flip side of this question, Paul. Now that we know how oxytocin gets generated, it requires people, and there's certain aspects where when you are with a new person, you can get more of it. So I get that. But if you're in a long-term relationship or you've had relationships with people for many, many years and the relationship isn't where you want it to be, could you, as yourself, could you do things, go to places or do things together, synchronize, which increase the oxytocin levels and rebond you, even in a long-term known relationship, if you will?
Great question again. And luckily we've studied that. So
Mhm.
yeah, you can do a reset. I think the longer that relationship has kind of degraded, generally the harder it is. So again, this kind of lazy brain sets up default pathways. And when my default pathway, say with a romantic partner, is kind of blah, then it takes a lot of work to get out of that rut, if you will, a kind of
Mhm.
a neurologic rut. But the way to hack the system, since you opened up that word, is to do something which is um, moderately stressful. So go tandem skydiving with your partner. Go on a roller coaster. Take a helicopter ride. So I'll tell you a quick story. So I'm a professor in Claremont and give a lot of talks. Anyway, I had this freshman come up, kind of nerdy kid, wasn't in my class. And I guess I gave a talk. And he said, "Oh, want to meet a girl." I said, "Oh, you know, when you go on a date, you should do something exciting. The helicopter ride, the whatever it is, the roller coaster, skydiving." Um, and sure enough, a couple of years later, I run into this kid on campus, and he has this knockout gorgeous girlfriend. And he
Wow.
said, "I took your advice on our first date. We took a sunset helicopter ride over Santa Monica Pier and over the ocean and watched the sunset, and we've been together ever since." And it was kind of like, he wasn't a bad looking guy, just kind of average, but his girlfriend was really hot. So,
Hmm.
um, you know, all these things work, right? It's not just theory, but it seems to work in practice. So, yeah. So, how do you reset? Find an activity you and your partner can do together, but it's got to have enough stress to it. So, a number of times we've looked at things like dancing. So we've taken blood before and after people dance, and dancing is a really you're physically close. It doesn't even have to be dancing with your partner. It could be looked at folk dancing, like a square dancing where you're changing partners. That's fine. You're all doing the same kind of thing, and
Hmm.
everybody ends up releasing oxytocin. So,
Mm.
but you got to hit the system with something hard to get you out of
Mhm.
that rut.
Mm. Very interesting. Thank you for that answer. I was wondering about this. Okay, so the next question I have for you is obviously, as you know, we're living far from each other in pandemic, so we're not spending time with each other as much as we would, which would which would get us to that we don't have enough oxytocin in our bodies. But I think I've heard you say that even doing a Zoom call can increase oxytocin levels. So you don't have to be physically present with a person, but this could work as well. Is that correct?
It is, and then you can also hack that system. So we found that relative to in-person interactions of the same caliber, like the same strength of relationship, Video conferencing gets you about 80% of the oxytocin release as in person, which is pretty good.
Mhm.
And then texting is more like 40 or 50%. So, the more bandwidth of that experience, that person you can hit the brain with, the better. So how do I hack the system? I do what I said earlier. I inquire about your emotional state, right? I spend time getting to know you. So even in businesses, those who use we'll talk about our company in a minute, but those who use the emergent neuroscience technology to assess the connection between individuals, if you're in a business meeting, you can spend the first 5 minutes doing what I call an emotional check-in. Hey, how you doing? How's your family doing? You guys all right? And that's
Mhm.
what we normally do when we meet each other in the hallway. But now
Yeah.
that we have scheduled this 1 hour on Zoom, we think, oh, I got to get to the work right away. Actually,
Mhm.
not. You want to maintain and build
Mhm.
on that connection. So take those first 5 minutes and just do an emotional check-in. And again, it doesn't have to be sad and weepy and my dog died or whatever. I mean, if that really happened, it's okay to share that. But spend the time to invest in those relationships because that investment will have a return. So think of this as a bank. You're putting deposits into this connection bank. I need to connect to people around me. If I help them release oxytocin, they help release oxytocin to me, and we'll be more like a jazz quartet where we can figure out what each other are doing
Mhm.
emotionally, not just cognitively, but oxytocin is playing on this emotional dimension, which, like at work, we think, oh, we shouldn't talk about that. Nonsense.
Yeah.
That's not the way we evolved. We evolved actually to be emotional creatures. So yeah, it's okay. I mean, not too much, right?
Yeah.
You may have worked with people like I have who kind of are just sad, weepy people, and they don't seem to get a lot done, and just want to talk about how sad their life is. And that's not the bestest way to be productive. But some of that actually is really important. And then lastly, also realizing that because the brain's adapting, at millisecond frequency, people are going to have bad days, from your spouse to your kids to your colleagues at work. There's no consistency. If your brain's consistent, it's not adapting, and that's not good for your survival. So expect people to be variable, and even yourself. And if you're, I don't know, your dog died and you got cranky that day at work, the next day go in and tell people, I was kind of a jerk yesterday. I didn't mean to be, but my dog died. I didn't feel like talking about it. And if I was cranky with you, I need to apologize. And people, oh, okay, I got it. Yeah, I've been there. Right. So
It's fantastic. Thank you. You dropped so many tips in the last 15 minutes. I'm just thinking, I'm blessed to be having folks like you, experts like you. Like you've done, this is like years and years of research. So thank you, Paul, for coming on and just giving us, distilling the tips that we can use today, tomorrow in our lives to become better at this. Now, you also happen to live in a blue zone called Loma Linda in California. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts in terms of the relationship between oxytocin and health span and or lifespan.
mhm. So a blue zone, for people who don't know, are these generally very small regions or cities where people regularly live past 100. And I live in a blue zone because the primary employer here is a hospital, the Millennium University Medical Center, which is run by a Seventh-day Adventist church. And Seventh-day Adventists are vegetarians. They don't drink and they don't smoke. They tend to be in helping professions. They have very tight social communities. And they really believe in taking days off and resting when possible. So they really have this sort of triple whammy, which is they eat well, they exercise, they get enough sleep, and they have tight social relationships. So that's kind of the recipe to have longer health span, as you said, not just lifespan but health span. So
Mhm.
we are currently doing have done research, by the way, in Loma Linda on the very old, which seems like
Mhm.
the most important question, particularly if you have gray hair like me, which is, well, how do you live a really fulfilled and long life? And fulfilled and long may not always run together, but often they do. And I think one of the takeaways from the very long running Adventist Health Study is service. That again, playing on that oxytocin dimension, once you get the exercise and food and sleep down, then what else can I do? It's really connecting to others, volunteering, helping other people, being open to those around you. Again, not being a what's the thing, a doormat where people walk all over you or something. No, I'm just saying, try to be of service. So I'm in a startup world now, and I have a 3-year-old startup, and there's a very strong ethos in the startup community of helping other people. So whenever I interact with guys who have startups, guys in the general sense, women and men, I always say, what can I do to be of service to you? And in fact, that's one of the things I've done for many years, Faraz,
Mm.
is I try to end every conversation with the word service. Just say, how can I be of service to you? And often people are taken aback, like, oh, wow, that's great. So
Right.
again, I may be sort of pitching, my software to sell to somebody, but I also want to be of service to them. So if that software, if they subscribe to our company's software and that solves a problem for them, I have been of service to them. I'm getting paid as well. That's great, but I'm also being of service. But they might say, gosh, I really like to use someone else's software, or really like to connect to whomever. So I was just talking to a company right before I talked to you, a startup. I don't think they're going to be clients of ours. I maybe they will eventually. And I started making some connections. You know what? You guys have a really cool product. You're helping people connect at work. Awesome. Let me connect you to a couple of people who I think would love to talk to you. So it took me, I don't know, 6-7 minutes, and I generated a lot of goodwill. And why not?
Yeah. That's fascinating. So let's get into that. You've written a book called The Trust Factor, Paul, in which you discuss the secret of culture in high performance companies. I want to touch on that because we currently, unfortunate, but we live in the most abundant times that this humanity has ever seen. Like life has never been easier for us. But as a collective, I think the percentages are pretty high in the 70s of people that are not satisfied with their job or how they make a living. And so I think you actually help folks find meaning in the work. And so I guess in terms of framing the question, what have you found in your research in terms of how happy people are and how do you turn that around?
Great question. So again, the Gallup data on 2/3 of people are disengaged at work. It's pretty bogus. The questions are asked in a kind of a funny way. And if you look at how much time people spend talking about work, how much time they spend getting additional training, it doesn't seem like people hate their jobs. And so when I spend time in companies, I have an index I call the shoulder index. So if I see people like this, Bob, hey, you're Paul Zak, I'm great right here. Or I see people like this, oh, hey, you're Paul Zak, right? The shoulders are down.
Right.
So I certainly see companies with the shoulders down, but a lot of people have a lot of energy at work, right? We have goals, we have people that we care about, we're doing something great for the world. And again, I use the word service, right? Every organization, for-profit, nonprofit, government, is really about service to help people live better lives. Otherwise, I don't need this good or this service if it's not improving my life in some level. So in experiments we've done, we've shown that when you identify for groups of individuals the social purpose of their work, they put in much more effort. Even though they say they didn't, they just do. They produce a lot more. So first of all is understand that all businesses in the service realm, right? It's all about giving people some tool to improve their life, number one. Number two, then build a culture where people can make these connections. They can learn to trust each other. They have opportunities to really get to know and care about the people they're with. And so I developed a survey tool that assesses the sets of behaviors upon which organizational trust is based, and those can be measured and therefore managed for higher performance. So one of the companies in the book that was very kind to let us use their data is Zappos, online shoe and clothing seller. Yeah, wonderful company, and dear Tony Hsieh just passed away, unfortunately, the founder.
Yeah.
And so Tony gave us permission to actually take blood from their employees, measure brain activity while they worked, and we found that something as simple as in the Zappos's case, there was called their 10 core family principles for the Zappos family, and that family is a good word for employees, right? We're a family. We need to hang together. We're going to spend a lot of hours together. Just reading those and discussing them caused an oxytocin release, right? Versus people who just hung out and didn't talk. So it's really talking about why we're here, why we're together. Let's focus on building those relationships. So it doesn't take long, but anyway, I think it's an opportunity for people to get a great set of satisfaction by understanding that the work they're doing is important. So I have a daughter in college, and she works for Walmart. She's a stalker for Walmart while she's in college. Can you imagine something that's more important during COVID times than making sure that food gets from trucks to shelves so people can buy it, right? I mean, it's a big deal because you just can't, easily pick up food all the time. So yeah, that's really important. And then recognizing that importance, which Walmart does a pretty good job at, actually. Even the terms are important. So people laugh at the Subway sandwich artist, but how about the Apple Genius Bar, right? It sets these expectations that you're doing something that's important, right? So, yeah, make that sandwich look good. Yeah, don't be a schlub, make it great. And if you're Apple, man, those employees had better know their stuff, or people are gonna, because the expectations are high. So
Right.
setting those expectations, giving a chance, people a chance to grow personally and professionally, really creating an environment where people um, can feel like they're getting life satisfaction. So just to put a cap on that, sorry, it's a very long answer to a short question.
No.
Individuals who work in high trust organizations not only enjoy their jobs more, stay on the job longer, that is, they're less likely to quit, they actually are more satisfied with their lives outside of work. That is, they're better parents, they're better spouses, they're better citizens, because they're not being ground down at work, right? They have a sense of accomplishment, and that they've done something important for the world. And so that's the kind of workplaces that sustain high performance over the long term.
Yeah, something you just said struck with me just now, or struck me as very interesting. You talked about Walmart and how they're a force for good because they're providing this service that a lot of people need actually at the prices that they're providing. And in some of the circles I run in, there are people like scoff down on, normal grocery stores, much less Walmart because it's a discounted store. And so just thinking about reframing how you think about the service that the company, your corporation that's hiring you is providing as a good for the community, it just makes a lot of difference. And it, like, as you were talking, I was thinking about, my goodness, I think of Walmart a different way just now. So yeah, so that's great. If there's organizations, people in organizations listening, you should definitely reach out to Dr. Paul Zak and hire him to look at your company culture and improve it in many ways. So tell us about your neuroscience as a service platform, Paul.
Yeah, so some years ago, we launched a company 3 years ago called Immersion Neuroscience that democratized neuroscience. So, what do you think about neuroscience? Think, well, it's expensive, you need specialized training, you need all kinds of equipment. Let's get rid of all those things. So because we've spent so many years and millions of dollars to understand, in particular, how people value experiences, whether that's a shopping experience, whether it's working with colleagues, going to a movie, we identified these core neurologic data streams in the brain that we've called immersion. This is like why people cry at the end of movies, right? You're so immersed in the story that it's had this physiologic effect on you.
Mm-hmm.
And so we basically have written software so that we can pull these signals from a smartwatch. We use that to get the activity of the cranial nerves and infer what the brain's doing, and have shown that these immersive states are enjoyable. They are memorable. In the training and education space, you want to have people remember information. People who are immersed in, say, a team meeting are more productive afterwards. And so, and we can predict, things like movie ticket sales and sales amounts from advertising with 80+% accuracy using neurologic data that we don't collect, you collect. It's a piece of software using people's own wearable technology. So it really is a brand new thing in the world, and we're totally blessed to have amazing companies, movie studios and TV networks and professional services organizations that use our technology every day so that they can create great experiences. So essentially, we measure what your brain loves second by second, any place people are.
So that's fascinating. In my past life, I used to work, or I was an account manager for Warner Bros. Studios in Los Angeles. And yes, they had algorithms where they wanted to figure out what the opening day sales were going to be. And they had all these predictive algorithms and all these data streams coming in to kind of try to predict what the opening day numbers are going to be and to increase them. So fascinating stuff what you're doing.
Yeah,
This is a
they've
different
been a
angle.
client. Warner Brothers has been a client. They've been
Oh,
public
awesome.
about that, so we can discuss them, and we can add about 10% more predictive accuracy to those models,
Mm-hmm.
because just having people watch, say, a movie trailer, we can predict how effective that movie will sell in the theaters when there were theaters in the olden days.
Right.
But for anybody who produces a lot of content, Warner Brothers is a good example. But
Mm-hmm.
if you're producing a lot of content, whether that's meetings, entertainment, advertising, why not figure out how to make it better? So we can get data second by second. There's just no way to get that kind of resolution by asking people.
Right.
And asking you about your underlying emotional state, which is largely unconscious, just a fool's errand, right?
Mm-hmm.
Liking is a dumb question to me. How
Right.
much do you like this movie? I don't care. I care if it turns on your brain so much that you really want to see it, right? That's love. Liking is like, I don't know. Compared to what? Compared to my kids? Compared to my dog? For us, my dog has never talked back to me. That dog is perfect. He loves me unconditionally. My
Right.
kids, it depends what day of the week it is.
right? Or if they're
I'm
teenagers or not,
kidding.
right? Yeah.
They're fine. I'm kidding you.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been amazing. I've got one other question for you, one last question in terms of oxytocin levels in our body. What I learned is that when the levels go up in our body in response to some of the things we talked about, they also enter the brain, they go through the blood-brain barrier, and they act as a neurotransmitter, and therefore they change the way the brain responds to the to sensory input or just people around you.
Mhm.
So in terms of hacking oxytocin, we talked about natural means you could do that, but are there unnatural ways? Meaning, can you inject oxytocin? Could you inhale it? And if so, how would you do that?
Yeah, good question. So again, just to be clear, oxytocin is made in the brain and on stimulus release in the brain and the bloodstream. So it's not
Okay.
crossing the blood-brain barrier outbound, not inbound.
Okay. Got
So
it.
we have done studies where we've
Mhm.
taken synthetic oxytocin and infused it through the nose. It will cross the blood-brain barrier. Those are studies to show the causal effects of oxytocin. It's not a treatment. Early on, people looked at whether oxytocin could, say, help people with autism and other disorders associated with social dysfunctions. And the short answer is no, not really, because these larger networks that oxytocin activates are dysregulated in the brain. My team is doing clinical trials on a number of invasive tools to use with psychiatric and neurologic patients to measure oxytocin. But for most of us, something, you need a piece of software. So that's why we made the immersion neuroscience platform, so that companies and hopefully eventually consumers themselves can actually measure how effectively they're connecting to others. So as you may know, Faraz, I've been on a bunch of dating shows, The
Yes, The
Bachelor and
Bachelor.
others.
Yeah, I've seen
Yeah,
you
so we
there.
know we,
Uh-huh.
we kind of use these technologies to assess that strength of connection, particularly as we said earlier, on that first meeting between the Bachelor and some of the
Mhm.
women he was considering to marry. And indeed, we're pretty accurate predicting the strength of those relationships. So
Wow.
I do think once we're in this quantified self world, that it won't be 2021, but look for 2022, that there will be a consumer application in which you'll have the ability with a smartwatch to assess how effectively you're connecting to others. And as you said on the top of the hour, that connection is so powerful, such an effective way to live a better life, to be happier, to be healthier, and to live longer. Who could not want that? But right now,
Mhm.
what we're missing is the ability to measure it. And so once we have that ability, and again, we have at least the B2B version of that, then individuals can really curate their life for greater happiness and greater longevity.
Man, that is fantastic, Paul. I know a few self-quantification nerds that would love to use your technology when it releases to the public. And when it does, please come back on the podcast. I'd love to spread the word as well.
Thank you.
So thank you, Paul, again for coming on the Anti-Aging Hacks Show. This has been a fascinating interview. I've learned a lot about oxytocin, and I hope the listeners have as well.